Welcome to the Customer First Thinking Podcast, Episode 12. My name is Stephen Shaw, the host of this podcast. In this episode, we interview Bryan Pearson, the former CEO of Loyalty One and a true pioneer in loyalty marketing. Canadians do love their loyalty programs. They not only belong to more than a dozen different programs on average, they are amongst the most active participants in the world, according to a KPMG study last year. That study found that 56% of Canadians earn program rewards at least several times a week. Some of these programs are mammoth in size. The PC Optimum loyalty program has 16 million members. Air Miles has 11 million. Aeroplan has 5 million. Today, just about every retailer, grocer, gas station operator, quick serve restaurant, and hotel offers some kind of loyalty program. People just want to save money, it seems, whether that comes in the form of redeemable points, instant discounts, cashback, or other monetary prizes and incentives. But does that make them loyal to the company or to the program? That question has dogged the loyalty business ever since the advent of frequent flyer programs in the 1980s, which were designed as barriers to exit, a way to discourage people from switching airlines. And that is largely how most loyalty programs operate today, driving repeat sales through this for that reward schemes. The term loyalty is really a misnomer, mistaken for what it actually means, sacrificing a bit of margin to win repeat business. In other words, a promotional ploy. Most people admit these programs do little to make them feel more loyal, especially since most are merely variations on the earn and burn concept. They see them as savings programs, not loyalty programs. The benefit to the loyalty program operator is easy to see, the capability to track and influence individual buying behavior. For members, however, the program experience is purely transactional. Nothing about it makes them feel special or appreciated, more a contractual commitment than an expression of gratitude for their business. That's why loyalty programs are long overdue for reinvention. They should show greater appreciation to customers. They should foster a more intimate relationship based on known needs and behavior. They should treat customers as valued members of a community. They should feel like a natural extension of the brand experience. But that means marketers must stop thinking of them as loyalty programs. Instead, they need to be rebooted as customer programs designed to humanize the brand experience. As the former CEO of Loyalty One, which operates the Air Miles program, Bryan Pearson is a passionate believer in the need to reimagine loyalty marketing. He was an early pioneer in the growth of coalition loyalty programs, which became highly popular in Canada because of the opportunity for collectors to earn rewards faster through a wide network of sponsors. Hired by Air Miles when it first began in 1992, Bryan rose through the ranks to lead the 1,500-person company until he parted ways last August in a surprise departure. Under his 12-year stewardship, Loyalty One became highly proficient at converting the massive amount of purchase data it had amassed on 2/3 of Canadian households into valuable marketing insights for sponsors. Today, Bryan is a popular keynote speaker on the conference circuit, sharing his ideas on how to transform loyalty marketing. I started our interview by asking him whether he had any inkling when he was first hired by Air Miles that it would take off so quickly with so many Canadians.
The outcome of Air Miles and how big it has become far exceeded any of our wildest imaginations. And I think we really saw that in the late 90s when we started to get grocery penetration across the country and really the program just took off at that point. But at the end of the day, not only did the business exceed the wildest expectations, but I think what we've been able to do for our clients and in recognizing the full potential of what we created, it's reached way beyond the initial intent, which is really a promotional tool. And yet we're still a long way from what's possible, which is kind of the exciting piece still.
Right. Well, it was foundational what you did. I mean, you were creating a new mindset around the use of data, frankly, at the time. You were in the vanguard of a movement that was just getting momentum at the time.
It's a few of us who came out of a similar space, I think, Stephen, which was out of the database marketing space, who came in and joined the company. Ernie Johansson was one of those people who's now at Bank of Montreal. And we came in and looked at the business and said, wait a second, you guys are thinking of this as a promotion and a currency and sort of a buy-sell effect, but you're missing the biggest asset in the business. And that's the database of information you're creating on consumerism and Canadians. And, if you start to focus on that, then the value proposition completely changes for the sponsors and the clients, which were part of Air Miles. And I think that's really where the whole thing turned. And it was that focus and that sort of little critical insight, which I think was the spark which allowed the business to continue to grow for decades.
Decades is right, and on and on. So full disclosure here, my wife is an avid points collector, and I would put that in capital letters. In fact, I joke with her that that's her hobby, right? She plans her shopping around how many points and so on and so forth. She's telling me stories as I'm trying to read my weekend newspaper about her travails and so on and so forth. And I'm just thinking, wow, it's just like, how many more folks are there out there? Like, she's not unique. There's lots of folks out there. And Canadians, I think, have proven themselves over the years to be avid points collectors for whatever reason. Do you have an explanation for that? Is game theory come into play here as being a cause and effect?
Well, I think game theory plays a role in it for sure. I think it's but it's hardwired into the psyche or behavioral psychology of who we are as human beings. And so loyalty programs certainly tap into that, sort of animal reaction in the back of the brain of something for free and this sort of enjoyment factor. Not everybody is super excited and sort of likes to game them. But I would say in any program, in any sector that you look at, you're going to find that your very, very best customers either just simply spend a lot of money with you or they're making a conscious decision to gamify the system.
But isn't that the success of your coalition program, that people are making that conscious decision to go to this grocery store or use this credit card or, right? I mean, that's the whole purpose of the thing.
Yeah, if you move from proprietary to coalition, so multi-partner, that definitely is core to it. And what we've seen and proven in each and every category is this thing we call the network effect, which is the more partners that you use, the more loyal you become to any individual partner, because there's this sort of force multiplier or magnifier of the effect of your ability to collect. And so in a coalition program, the number one weapon you have to compete is the idea of speed of earning, your ability to actually earn that reward, whatever it is, an accelerated pace than if you were doing it historically in a standalone environment. And I think your comment on Canada, just to go back, is also very observant in the sense that I used to say the UK was the most sophisticated loyalty market around, but I now believe that Canada actually is the most competitive and sophisticated loyalty market. Not because of technology necessarily, not because of individual applications, but because foundationally there's a real commitment, and Canadians view loyalty programs as a differentiator. And they actually respond and look for the value that's inherent in these programs. In a lot of other markets, what you saw is loyalty programs defaulting to price or defaulting to much simpler mechanisms. And in Canada, I think there's a richer underpinning. And my theory is really quite simple. The genealogy of Canada, it all comes back in some ways to Air Miles and how we populated a lot of the population out there, and also other places like Steve, where you worked over time, where you were involved in different peripheral ways in and around the loyalty space. And so there's this rich database marketing history, and there's this rich loyalty history. And at one point, I think I remember, off the top 10 programs in Canada, 9 were being operated by alumni from the Air Miles Reward Program.
I believe that. Yeah. Well, it became like Amex used to be, a graduation school for marketers.
Yeah. And so I think this ethos sort of penetrated and permeated the marketplace, and where people looked at it and said, no, this isn't about, a cost to the business or something which is just a marketing expense, but there's this view that there's real inherent value if you operate a loyalty scheme, loyalty program in a way that is really designed to sort of engage, entice, and really reward the customer for what they do.
Is the reason that it took root in Canada so quickly is the fact that the infrastructure here allowed for that to happen, either in terms of the coverage of banks or the coverage of grocery stores, or that it enabled you to quickly get cross-country coverage? Did that make it easier to do here than perhaps it might have been elsewhere?
Well, it didn't feel quick in the moment because it did take us about 7 or 8 years to get that coverage.
Well, you had some big wins early, though. I mean,
we did. We had Safeway, Bank of Montreal, Shell came on fairly early.
Yeah, that was.
I think what really allowed us to build it well was, Canada operates a series of elegant oligopolies, right? So, where each particular sector has 3 to 5 critical players that sort of consume most of the consumer economics in the space. And so if you could get one of them and sustain their effort around accumulated new collectors, new consumers, and then have those consumers cross-populate across 2, 3, 4, 5 sponsors, what you do is you enact that network effect, and then our partners start to see real financial results. And then it sort of establishes the momentum and the staying power of the program. Certainly, the technological infrastructure helped, but I really think it comes back to our ability to nurture, some critical partners and to do the program digitally, right?
Yes.
Those were the two pieces which I think were mission critical to being able to stand up and sustain momentum, where in many other countries, like the US with Plenty, they just weren't ever able to create enough critical mass to actually demonstrate the results back to the partners.
I think you've had your own attempts to crack the US market very early on, in fact, and did not experience the same level of success, clearly. And as you point out, plenty to do with the business. What are the factors that have made it more difficult to create an equivalent type program in the U.S.?
Yeah. Oh, you can almost look at where has really good programs been set up. Mm-hmm. So Australia, New Zealand, England twice, Germany, Poland, those are probably the benchmark countries where a really decent coalition has been stood up. Mm-hmm. Again, in each of those places, I think similar factors were at play, which is you got the cornerstone, it's like a mall, the anchor tenants who came in and sort of created that ability to attract a critical mass of consumers, and then to be able to monetize that across important spending categories, which is everyday spending. So again, They started with petroleum and gas retailing, with grocery shopping. They usually had a financial services player, which brought a credit card or an earnings accelerator to the table. And then generally you had department store or home improvement or something like that. And if you can get those core categories stood up with sufficient market penetration, then you've got the right ingredients, as long as you get the economics and all the other things right in the background. And I think the problem with the U.S. is it's a very fragmented economy. Mm-hmm. If you can't get the really big players like Kroger or Safeway Albertsons to kind of step in, and
Kroger has its own program,
and that's what's happened, is that in the U.S. generally, the players down there, it was like putting together a Rubik's Cube. You were sort of had to manipulate it in a way that you could get critical mass in a market to demonstrate that you would get that network effect happening. And in the meantime, because of the free market approach to data that exists in the U.S. market, one of the big things that the coalition program does is, on a permission basis, secure this kind of unique ability to collect, accumulate, and then use that information for the benefit of the sponsors, because that's what the consumer does. They sign on to Air Miles or to Payback or to Nectar, and they essentially say, you can accumulate this information. And in the U.S., with the freedom that exists, one of the greatest benefits of a coalition program, there's a whole bunch of substitutes for that in the U.S. So the net is why would I put my brand at risk of another brand, if you want, through a coalition, when at the end of the day, I can get 80% of the benefit that I would see by virtue of just buying data on the market and aggregating it with the information that I have through my own proprietary program. And so I think it's been really tough to make a go of it. And Plenty just, did the same thing that everybody else did, which is they felt a need to go to market too early without the right partners in place. And, I think we affectionately call that the $1 billion club, but it may be more than $1 billion now that's been spent trying to do loyalty, coalition loyalty in the U.S.
Crazy. Yeah. The market, was dramatically affected, I would say, when Air Canada made the decision to repatriate its own loyalty program and change the landscape, I would say, rather dramatically. What are your thoughts on Air Canada's motivations for doing that, and how do you see this evolving going forward?
You can see a little of the writing on the wall when they launched their altitude program. I think there was some sort of schism that happened between the airplane organization and the airline at some stage. And I believe what the airline was struggling with is where a lot of the market is heading towards, which is if I'm going to be creating unique experiences for my best customers. So I'm going to create a super elite, their top tier, gets a certain suite of benefits. The perception they had is that more credit was going to Airplan than it was going to the airline for what they were creating. And so, you saw this segregation of programs where they launched their own brand Altitude, and they really turned Airplan into a scoring mechanism for how you accumulated the currency. But they took the benefits out of Airplan and sort of attached those more to their brand. And I think when you look down the road at how this eventually unfolded, what they probably came to the conclusion of, having seen other things that happened in the market, that at the end of the day, the risk of essentially untethering themselves completely from Airplan was so great on their partners, credit card companies, and on the airline, and what a mess that might have created, that at the end of the day, it was probably cheaper to acquire Airplan and just fold it into all the other activities they did and really take complete ownership of it than it was to separate and continue to launch their own program and launch their own physical currency, which would have been, the way they kept score. So for me, it's natural evolution. It's sort of connected to where Canada wanted to take loyalty in general. And really the structure of, maybe the one I haven't talked about, is the structure of a deal that really goes back to the days of when Ace spun out Aeroplan, saw that there was way more multiple in the coalition loyalty business than there was in the
even today,
airline.
I think investors in the U.S. value the loyalty programs more than they do the airlines. I think I've read that figure.
Yeah, well, there's more inherent value, and we can go back to department store in the old Sears days where the department store made no money and the Sears credit card made 110% of the profit of the department store. Yeah, so in many instances, loyalty is the same mechanic in certain industries and certain sectors.
Well, it's interesting because I remember distinctly interviewing Rupert Duchesne for Direct Marketing Magazine around the time of Aeroplan spinning off. And I asked him that question. I still remember asking him this: what happens if Air Canada decides not to sell you the miles at market value at some point down the road?
Right.
He obfuscated a little bit around the answer to that question, but he had thought about it clearly, that was going to be a risk down the road.
Yeah.
I want to ask about Loyalty One. There's a lot of conversation today about first-party data and the desire to have it and have access to it in a way that never existed before. Is this going to be the push that companies need, this desire to acquire first-party data, to shift to creating their own proprietary loyalty programs if they don't exist today? And if that's not the door they go through, they'll go through some other door, like a lot of these DTC startups are doing today. So do you see that in the cards, having an organization that straddles both areas? Do you see this desire or increasing desire to actually move into creating proprietary programs?
Yeah, I think there's more and more companies that are, if they're in loyalty, then they're trying to figure out how they improve that value proposition and how they create a connection with consumers through that. If they're not in loyalty today, I think it's fair to say that anybody who's not in loyalty is trying to figure out what the mechanism is to understand who their customers are. And loyalty has to be on the very short list of how am I going to actually engage.
How do you get people to self-identify if you don't offer them something in return, I presume?
Well,
hard to build audience otherwise.
It's a loyalty program or a loyalty program proxy. We can talk about Amazon and Prime, right? Is that a loyalty program or is that a paid benefit or is it both, right? But they found another way to create a line of sight, which created an engagement point with consumers.
Well, I love Jeff Bezos' quote about Prime. He said, we wanted to create a program where you'd be crazy not to want to sign up or be part of, right?
Yeah,
So,
and that let's just put that as a halo over the remainder of the conversation, because I think that's really where companies are going to have to think about their competitive edge. We were talking a little bit about the loyalty leap, and the fact I wrote that 6 or 7 years ago now, which means I really wrote it 8 years ago. Yeah. And it was for me, it was really a cry for help to the industry to say, come on, let's step up, because we're sitting on all this information. The consumer knows that you're sitting on all the information, and what they simply want is for you to improve the experience, to actually use that in a way which benefits them in a capacity which makes sense for them from, whatever retail category, whatever service category you're in. And in so many instances, what you saw was people were, thinking it was just a promotion, back to the very beginning even of Air Miles, and not engaging the consumer, or engaging in even that conversation of, what else could this data do? And, fast forward now a period of time, and I think between, AI, machine learning, we can go through all the buzzwords, but at the end of the day, it all fundamentally points to the same thing, which is I have this pool or wealth of information about my consumer, and how can I draw inferences or learning from that, which I can use strategically to create a competitive advantage.
Well, I want to come back to that, because it's such an important statement that you just made. I want to make sure you have the airtime to address this. I just don't want to leave a thread of a thought, though, because it is, your book was written 6-8 years ago, and it did speak to this whole idea of creating sort of a more cohesive customer experience, leveraging loyalty data for sure, and that's the whole customer experience movement. Frankly, that's the customer first thinking that we talk about as well. Mm-hmm. But according to Forrester, most members of loyalty programs, and now here they're referring specifically to the U.S., of course, but don't really feel, and this is, I think, the point you were just making, that those programs make them any more loyal to the brand. So really today, loyalty markets still haven't stopped treating it as a promotional platform. And I would even point to, maybe I'm out of line here, but the Optimum program to me is largely as a promotions program, not a loyalty building, emotional loyalty building program. I guess it works, clearly. But do you see the beginnings of an acceptance that the loyalty program has to be much more than just about buying loyalty as opposed to earning it?
Yeah, I think I would agree foundationally with the Forrester comment. I do think that an awful lot of loyalty programs, because of the lack of proper stewardship or vision, end up in a place which they're glorified discount programs. And so, what the consumer looks at is, I can either not get the discount or I can sign up and get the discount. But you're really only appealing to one segment of the consumer base, which is that consumer who's looking for best price. Right. And not every consumer defines value by best price. A lot of consumers define value by adding an experience, or it adds in content and information, or it adds in help and ease of use and those kinds of things. And price is important, but it's not necessarily the be all and end all, despite what everybody kind of trumpets out in the marketplace. When you look at the evolution of where, if you pull a string through and you say, is the vast majority of the market still doing that? I would say that in the last 8 years, there has been, seismic is too strong a word, but I'd say there is a seismic change to the conversation. I'm not sure there's a seismic change in the implementation.
No.
Okay, so I think that there's a lot more conversation, again, back because of these tools and techniques which have sort of arisen, which has made the ability to gather, analyze, draw conclusions from the information that people have. But there still is missing, in my mind, the kind of artistic direction around, how do you actually take all this data and information, learning, and craft it into strategy? But, it certainly, in my mind, has shifted the view that loyalty is just a means to, another means to apply a portion of my marketing budget in terms of where I want to spend money against the consumer.
Exactly.
Right? And it has shifted. Now, the other thing I'd say, because you used Optimum, is the default still, unfortunately, is that companies, when they do the analytics, are figuring out how to create, yes, a little bit more personalized experience, but there's still an awful lot of, let me shape that and drive it and sort of shield my profitability or shield whatever it is, and sort of to drive the consumer's behavior in a way which is as much about the retailer's profitability as it is about the experience for the consumer.
Well, it's about increasing visit frequency and basket size for the most part. I love the terms that you guys used to use in your economic modeling as lift and shift. I still use that term. It's so perfect. But if it's a commercial intent, then it's a targeting message and a promotional offer. If you want to introduce emotional angle to this, which is I want to feel better about the experience I'm having, I think that's where the programs are struggling. And I'm not sure it's the fault of the programs as much as it is in often the organizational model that doesn't give freedom to people who want to say, no, we actually have to aim higher here in what we're trying to aspire for the program. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I think the sophistication of aiming higher, we're not at in a wholesale capacity yet. I think the sophistication of being able to get offers out there and to sort of increase the relevance of the offer. So at least now, right, I think you would agree that at least now when my supermarket retailer sends me, here's the top 10 things that you should be looking at, 8 out of 10 are stuff that you've actually seen in my basket before. Whereas if you went back in the time tunnel 5 years, I'd say they were lucky to hit 30%. Okay, so from that perspective, I think there's an acceleration in benefit in relevance and sort of some personalization. But the view of saying, I'm not even talking about, one-to-one. If we go back all the way to Hughes and the thinking of, one-to-one marketing, I'm thinking just in the terms of one to few or one to segment. Do you know what I mean? Totally. Is that in that environment, we still haven't got all the way. It's still Fisher Price. It's still blocks and circles. Like the ability for us to acquire this information, identify the real criticality of what this consumer might be going through, and then to tailor an experience to who they are, we are Stone Age.
Well, and I think it's, and forgive me for this term, but there's no corpus callosum between the analytics and insight group and strategic planning.
Not yet.
There's no textbook that says this is actually the way you need to think about it. Here's step by step what you do. I mean, maybe old catalog marketers could come up with that because they could connect RFM models for sure. But then they were still basically trying to sell stuff as opposed to how do I use this insight to actually develop different experiences for different parts of my population or have different values and things that matter to them. That's the biggest challenge, right?
Yeah, and technology is not the barrier anymore. There still is, work that needs to happen from a technology standpoint. But if you go back in the time tunnel to when we were young men, we dreamt of this stuff.
Yeah, of course.
Right? And then you had to think about how you executed it through direct mail. I think it made us smarter marketers because we really had to do the analytic work to figure out where the returns were, right? Today, it's sort of gone back to a mass targeted sort of spray and pray mentality because your economic cost of putting an email out is next to zero, right? Or a text message or any of that, or an ad tech, or putting something through the ad tech world and sort of loading it up because that person may have passed by your website at some point and you decide I'm going to throw something back out there and see if I can bring them back. That approach is zero. All the media dollars have gone there, but you know what I'm saying. And yet, how do you create richness? And is there going to be a shift in how the companies decide to spend the money? And for that, it's my pet peeve in the entire system is we are still a conquest marketing mentality.
Acquisition and growth.
And, the whole term that used to be used, which is sort of a customer grooming. In other words, trying to migrate the customers you have, understand them, engage with them, lend them something that's going to be more personalized, which will, connect them more with your brand and grow. That's still not the mainstay of what.
So it's so interesting because the genesis of the term relationship marketing goes back to 1983, and the term came up because a professor in the U.S. looked at how dollars were spent and was I understand why companies were so fixated on acquisition when a lot of the potential value and future revenue actually lay in existing customers. And so he just thought it was common sense when he introduced the term. It took 10 years before that term had any traction whatsoever. And today we accept it as a natural part of the language, but we're still not practicing it because, to your point, companies from on down on top basically say, we need to put growth ahead of any other objective for sure. It's not creating I think the challenge here for CXM people that are in charge of customer experience is to connect the dots between growth and where the value is in that portfolio. And I think that's where they struggle today, even retailers.
Which connects us back to one of the earlier topics, which is, what is the role of loyalty and why will more people get into loyalty?
Right.
Because in the absence of something which defines an ability to circle, to connect that back to this is Bryan Pearson, who is effectively shopping, and here I can track their behavior over time. Most companies just don't have the capacity, retailers in particular. So now the question is not who's that photo ID, not photo ID, but who's the facial recognition to some anonymized number that I came and I watched and I saw come. I mean, there's all sorts of proxies for it. At the end of the day, you need to know it's Bryan Pearson who wants to engage with my brand, who has demonstrated this kind of capacity. And until you get that longitudinal view of the customer and their activity over time, cross-category to the SKU level, et cetera, you as somebody doing CXM, it's still a little bit ethereal. And I think that's where the worlds collide and everything starts to jive, is this vision that experience will be the differentiator, right? It will be the differentiator. I write a lot for Forbes on retail, and that's a core theme of where I go all the time, which is essentially, online's coming offline for a reason. And that's because they need to create a physical presence to add an experience to the brand. Correct. Beyond a box arriving. It's Warby Parker and looking at my glasses and trying them on, sending back the ones I don't want. Right. In Chicago, you go to a store. Yeah. And then they still order online, but you go to the store.
Or even Amazon has Amazon Go now.
Yeah. This is what the brand is about. Right, and everybody who's offline from a retail standpoint today, bricks and mortar, is looking at the incursions that the online retailers are making and the doomsday predictions of everybody. But they need to pivot and think about, what am I going to stand for and what's my experience? And so experience is a great differentiator. And the question we're here spending time solving as an organization is proprietary network, campaign-based, long-term card-based, whatever it is, it's how are we going to slot back in and use the assets we create to affect change, to allow our partners to compete in this world, which is so dynamically changing over the last 5
and
years.
it's obviously particularly in the retail space with the challenges they have and the necessity to actually create a good store experience today, and it's interesting. But at the end of it all, you need a financial model to demonstrate that this is worthwhile. Isn't that another tough thing to do? I mean, go back to when you started Air Miles. You were great at this. You guys went and presented financial models to show the potential business value and the network effect you referenced earlier. Today, if you're pitching a company on the logic of getting into this marketplace, notwithstanding, I think you used the term ethereal consideration.
It's not ethereal, unfortunately.
Be nice to customers. Yeah. No, this is really.
You mean in terms of the experience?
Yeah.
Yes.
No, I'm saying that you have to go in and present the financial case to divert X% of your budget now out of promotions into a loyalty program. So there's that. But more than that, out of acquisition into customer retention and loyalty. There's a business case that has to be built around that. Is when you go in today to promote the concept of a loyalty program, how are you presenting that business model today? Is it in the broader context of the business? Is it in the more narrow context of a tactical execution?
If I'm really fair about it, I would say that in most instances, the client or potential client is viewing it immediately in the context of the most narrow framework, which is, what did the activities, the immediacy of the activities around the program, what did that generate from a benefit standpoint? Mm-hmm. Now, we're able to pull that out in different ways because we look at, what are the adjacent behavioral changes that existed? So if we're thinking supermarket loyalty, because this is easy to talk about, is when you run a promotion and you get the gamification from the consumer, how did the consumer gamify the system? So if you gave an offer, which was a spend-based offer, and then you earn a whole bunch of bonus points, what categories did they come from? How did that change the spend? Did they go deeper on sale items? They buy things which weren't on sale. They buy products or categories they wouldn't normally buy, and therefore they created a new experience in other parts of the store. So it starts by, the very core is, did it pay out or not? Because that's the way the companies are thinking. Then the next layer of the onion is really okay, what other benefits did I get from it? And then the widest one is really hey, if that's what's happening, then, where else could we apply this sort of tool or these capabilities in a way that it really is about this broader experience strategy conversation? I think the intent of many companies is they start from the experience and look in, but when they measure, they start from the inside and work out, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. I mean, but at the highest level of that scorecard hierarchy would exist things like NPS and customer retention and churn factor, which, if you're improving loyalty, presumably will improve over time. Is that a key part of your business case? Or, as you put it, do you really start to say, no, the incremental spend you're going to get will outweigh the investment in this by a 5-to-1 ratio?
We do both. So the answer is yes and. So yes, we do both ends of that, because I think if you're not telling that story, there's a lot of places that an organization could invest their money in different ways. Totally. And so you have to talk about the enablement aspect, and you have to talk about the direct impact, right? And so, let's put a firm example. We just completed at Loyalty One our sort of benchmark study looking at loyalty and customer management, right? And we broadened the platform, because historically we went out and said, well, how many loyalty programs are there? How many people are members of loyalty programs? But that's really not telling the ecosystem story, right? The ecosystem story is, this really needs to be seen as a platform, and the platform then extends into what you're doing in CRM because it informs it. It goes into CXM because it informs it. And so then it goes into your pricing and your customer-centric merchandising, and it changes the way, if you bring consumer into what you're actually doing, what marketers are supposed to be doing, right? But consumers at the center of your purpose. If you really do that and you do your decisioning around that, you change the way you traditionally do a lot of the activities you would have done as a retailer or service provider. And what we're seeing is that generally, if you just did the ROI on a loyalty program, you might get, let's say, 50 to 100% ROIs, that sort of thing. I think the study said 71% of companies are spending more than 2%, of revenues on their loyalty program.
Which is high when you consider that the average marketing budget is something like around 7% of revenue.
Correct, which says, and then if you take the influence of that 2% onto what more of the marketing budget is being spent, I think the numbers were, it goes from 2 to 4% or something. So, that's, in my view, reflecting generally what's happened in the market around marketing budgets, which they've become more thoughtful in their application. But that information is really driving a lot of the activity. And then, what we're seeing is that you can see another, I think what we said was something like 3 to 5 times the effect of the loyalty program alone, again, if you start to use the consumer information to drive your consumer-centric pricing or your consumer-centric merchandising.
3 to 5 times the effect on revenue? Is that
no, so if your return is, let's say, 100% on your loyalty program, once you add in this other benefits on the way through, you could get to 300 to 500% ROIs, which are insane, right? Yeah. But we know from clients that we'll go in and they'll spend with us. I've got a couple of examples where we've done all the customer-centric pricing for them. So that's purely analytic. They pay us for the services of the analytics, and then they're seeing a 10x return on every dollar they spend in the analytics space, simply because and that's in savings, in just, let's say,
more efficient targeting,
cost avoidance of just not making bad decisions. And if you eliminate that, because the buyer always says that product needs to be at $3.99 and that's my sale price, and the reality is the elasticity and the codependencies of other products, you can sell it for $4.29. Price at $4.29, you don't lose the volume. you might lose a little bit on volume, but you make it up on the margin space. And so you're just optimizing for whatever aspect you're really pursuing as a retailer.
So,
That's
and retail's your sweet spot, I'm presuming.
Yeah, I'll spend a lot of time in it, yes.
Right. You write for Forbes magazine on retail. Let me ask you about that, because when you look at, well, let's take Canadian Tire as an example. Went digital, relaunched, I think, successfully their credit card loyalty program, have spent a lot of time and effort in terms of analytics space. But even they, in my own conversations a couple of years ago with them, they indicated that, in the end, you're trying to create, this is the analytic conversation, an end consumer that actually sees the value in the data instead of sees the value through the filter of their specific role in the organization, i.e. merchandising being a good example. So yes, you can use all that data to perhaps optimize category management, et cetera. Gary Serenverda, we talked about him earlier, now runs an AI-powered business to help retailers do that. Amazing story there. But in the end, their frustration was, in order to get to the right answers, you have to be asking the right questions.
Yep.
And isn't that the challenge for retailers from a skill set perspective, is that they really are newbies for the most part at this game and need the help of organizations like yourself and others, I'm presuming, to really succeed here. What do you see as the major stumbling blocks for companies to successfully do loyalty programs? Is it mindset? Is it legacy infrastructure? Is it a lack of imagination? Is it all of the above? What do you see as the big obstacles?
Yeah, I think I'm almost checking the all of the above box because it's a little bit of everything. Let me decompose that for a second. So I think from a traditional loyalty program aspect, I think there's so many great examples of different loyalty initiatives that exist out there that at the end, or even let's say moments of experience, right? Which there's tons of inspiration. You just have to cherry pick and think about where your loyalty program design and what you're trying to do. Ultimately, the goal of a really well-run loyalty program is to get, if you're really bought in, if you really drunk the Kool-Aid and you're completely bought in, it's about how do I get maximal information on my consumer base, which is probably an economic efficiency in there somewhere, but where's my maximum benefit, which is as much penetration, as much information as I can gather. I think where the system, so to get to that point, you probably need some advice, and sometimes you need somebody to help you think through it. But at the end of the day, that's not the hard part from an executive commitment standpoint. People are going to look around and say, I want to connect with customers. Like that's an easy story to tell. The company needs to understand that they're going to make that commitment and it's going to cost X percent, and they're going to reallocate. And that's a priority.
But it's also tough to find people with the skill sets to hire and convince that.
Yeah, that's where I really get on the second piece, right? Because I think it's, once you've got it set up and you're operating it, it is what do you do with that wealth of information which is coming in, which I think you're dead on. You need, the problem is that at that point you really start to fight existing paradigms which are well entrenched, and the lack of imagination may also be the lack of commitment that exists from the C-suite. This has to be top down through the organization from the chief executive officer. It cannot be bottoms up from somebody in a loyalty, department who's trying to get change through the organization, whatever else, because it is so broad reaching. The ability, as I wrote in the book, a while back, if you really want to make it real, you need to democratize that data. You need to gather all the data sources. You need to connect them in the company. You need to make that data available for decisioning. You need to have sort of this view, that this almost crusade-like view that I'm out here to create the optimal experience for the customer and to feel supported in many cases going against the traditional paradigms that have driven the retailer. And you see that more than anywhere in the merchandising departments. It could also be in pricing departments and service companies, right? And so or operations areas where we've not done that before. We've never put this at the end of the aisle. We've never executed this from a service standpoint. It's going to be too difficult to do in a hotel chain. I think that you need that real top-down view which encourages, embraces, and sort of allows the imagination to flow through the organization in with a mindset which is what can we do versus what can't we do.
Yeah, it's kind of ironic because the board is, for the most part, peopled by numbers obsessed executives, and they have a tough time buying into, I think, the softer elements of this. So it still has to, in the end, be a financial case that has to be made. But unless you're doing it with the, how shall I put, the passion and zeal of a proselytizer, an evangelist of some kind, yeah, they don't buy into the whole end game here, which is how do we become more customer centric? Right?
Yeah. And yet what's interesting is that when you look at so many industries that have been disintermediated, they've generally been disintermediated by new thinkers who have started with the consumer and not with the paradigm.
Absolutely.
And I think that the piece that I always encourage people here and all my clients, anybody I spend time talking to is, you can't, what we have is a camper and bear problem. Yeah, which is the following, which is, I think in many categories what happens is everybody looks around at the other campers and the bear's coming, and all they figure is, I just need to run faster than one of these guys, okay? Yes. And if I run faster than one of these guys, I'm not going to be eaten by the bear, okay? The problem is that they're comparing themselves across their traditional competitive framework. And so when you look across and everybody's doing the same thing, you don't have to move that fast. There's no urgency or call to action. And yet the consumer, is standing there looking and they're saying, I was flying the other day on whoever it was, and I had this incredible experience where I got, they approached me and they gave me this special pass and, whatever experience it was, because they acknowledged or somebody picked up on the fact or a system gave a flag that, Steve Shaw is an important person and he's flown so many miles this year and whatever else. And they kind of go, I'm this fantastic customer of retailer XYZ and I never get treated that way, and yet they've got all my information. Okay. And so I think, I call it transference. It's like the consumer's transference. They're category agnostic. They're not a camper and bear scenario. True. They basically are looking for, this is the best experience. And how many times have you been somewhere where somebody says, why can't somebody just Uber this? And it's almost a verb, right? It's like, you link a GPS system with payments and the ability to rate and sort of create this social network around my ability to have this sharing economy with a car that picks me up. And if it's not a good experience, I can rate them low and they won't be driving very long. Why can't they Uberize this?
And it's I had this conversation with Jay Baer recently where he wrote a book called Utility, and I've always used this term marketing as a service, and it is this idea that if we stop thinking of marketing as a communication department and start thinking of it as a service department, we would move faster down this road. So let me ask you, when you do look out at the retail marketplace for the ideal models of companies that are really doing this right, or even outside of retail, frankly, what are the companies that immediately come to mind, and why do those companies come to mind over others?
I find this the hardest question to answer.
Always is, isn't it?
It really is hard to answer because I'm an instances guy, right? So I don't think there's very many companies globally that are doing all the pieces right. They tend to do a little piece here right or a little piece of that right. And if I could create the Frankenstein example, I would put them together. True. But I'll give you two instances of things where I think for different reasons they're showing that little signs of brilliance of so in the airline space, I'll use Delta and I'll use United, competing carriers. But on Delta, something very simple, right? Which is the bag tracking piece. And I don't know if you've seen this, but if you've got the Delta app and you're connected through, when you're on the plane, you get this little message that says your bags are loaded on the plane, which is sort of the biggest piece of angst that I have as a traveler, especially somebody who almost never checks luggage. But they will track it. They say it's offloaded on the plane, it's on the baggage belt or whatever it is. And so especially if you're connecting, there's a little piece of experience. They're already getting that data because it's being fed into the system, but it's not connecting back to the consumer and recognizing the concern or that consumer constraint that they have around checking luggage, right? United, I hosted a roundtable. I had one guy, we were looking for examples of this. We were talking about exactly this topic. And he said United, he was flying through and they had the profile of who he was. I don't know what other data sources they may have had. I think a little bit of this might be luck as much as anything else. But he had a 3-hour layover. And when he landed, he gets a message pop up which says, you have a 3-hour layover. This is your gate in terms of where you're going. And by the way, there's a brew pub, which is around the corner, and a little map popped up which said, if you follow this, you can get to the brew pub and you'll get 10% off whatever you buy when you go through there. Okay. And he said, I love beer. And I was like, I don't think they knew that, but let's just say, another little example. And then one which is close to home for us is, we look at, what's the future where loyalty is going? Because we talk a lot about network loyalty and card-based loyalty, but we also run a company that does campaign-based loyalty, short-term, between sort of 8 to 12 weeks or up to 16 to 20-week programs in particularly food retailers. And IGA Quebec, they really embrace the view, and they understand that, at the end of the day, back to the gamification of consumer, you need this combo pack of how you create its own network of benefits. Mm-hmm. And some people will be more price oriented. Some people will be more oriented towards how do I get those beautiful set of wine glasses over the next 12 weeks. And somebody else will be, I want my miles. Like I really want to fly to Paris or whatever it is.
Or can you create a unique experience for me because I'm such a brand advocate and I'd like to get closer to the brand.
Right. And so, they found a way to marry those things together and execute the programs and do it in a way that they're really making it seamless for the consumer. In that instance, they recognized they had the Air Miles card, and so they linked their short-term and the other benefits. Everything happens through the card rather than having this layering of promotions. It's got this sort of central view of what's happening with the consumer, and then connecting the ease of use and even things like gifting, and you collect your stamps in this instance. It's real old school. These digital stamps is, if I don't really collect for that, but my daughter might be collecting for them, I can gift them all to her. And what they found is that when they gifted, the theory would be, well, you're not going to get the same level of uptick or loyalty or anything, but they spent 5% more, even though they weren't even actually collecting, they were collecting for somebody else.
Yeah.
Which is just bizarre, right? But it's really recognizing an inherent emotional connection with the consumer.
Yeah.
So those are 3 little examples. It's, there are different places where there are programs that are set up and they're running, they're doing a lot of things right, but it's very hard to say anybody's.
I can't agree more, which is pretty amazing to think how long loyalty programs have been around since the mid 80s, I guess, if you go right back to American Airlines.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And we still have not got to a point where it's right. But so my final question around this is, project out 5 years, 6 years even. We talked about your book being written 6, 8 years ago, and it's how fast time has gone. 5 years may not be the right period of time. Does the term actually loyalty program disappear entirely, and it stops getting looked at as a program and simply as a way of doing business?
Wow, yeah, that wasn't quite where I thought you'd go, but yes, I would actually agree with that assertion. I think in an ideal world, we always talked about big L and little L loyalty. Big L being the real consumer loyalty, the emotional loyalty you're trying to play with the customer.
I feel it with my heart, not my head.
Yeah, and little L loyalty being the programmatic elements. And I do think we start to talk about, what are really your customer loyalty considerations. And underneath that is a entire stack of activities which are focused on, really connecting with the consumer and finding a way to, understand them, a wealth of data, analytic tools which allow you to actually take advantage of that, a channel structure which allows you to act upon it, and then, ultimately getting to what the experiences are that you're willing to, load into that from a transformative standpoint to make it happen. So I totally see that evolution. I would equally say, we kind of are talking here about, you need to think about it as a platform. It's not a program, it's a platform.
And which is, certainly the word du jour. I'm not sure everybody actually totally can define what that really means, but that's an interesting point, is that platform then can be networked out to other partners, where as an ecosystem now, you got one platform connecting to another, or you're all participating on one platform to provide additional value and utility to your members, your customers, your subscribers, however you want to describe it.
Yeah, and I think the richness of data will become the competitive advantage. And so will coalition programs be the new black?
Or do you take your model out of China?
Well, yeah. And that's where I'm saying, I think you use the word network, and that's where I would go. I think it's about network, multi-partner. It's a loose coalition, not in the traditional sense. And I think coalitions need to evolve. Let's put it that way. But at the same point, I think other companies will be finding ways where they cozy up to adjacencies with brands that make sense.
And you verticalize.
Finding a way to actually, share to create a richer experience for customers.
You are sharing audience or member or subscriber data, and each of you is contributing in some way to an enhanced experience.
Right.
And maybe you're even, it's a sort of future version of Air Miles in some respects, because maybe you even brand that. I mean, you look at Alibaba in the States and Tencent and the others, they are effectively moved down that path, right? To end to end, from engagement to, and the concept of advertising is disappearing from that society and is being replaced by this idea of creating experiences that engage people.
Yep. And engaging them more effectively, closer into the moment that something is of need. If I'm going to buy a car, take a trip, whatever it is, it's like, how do you gather and curate that? Another favorite word of mine is about curation. And I think that you will not have this cacophony of brands out there that you're working with as a consumer. I think you will have a smaller suite of brands. So it's like your phone, most people have 60, 70 apps on their phone, and they use 7, 8 apps. They use 10% of it. And I think brands will be the same way. You have
select brand relationships that are in your inner circle, and all the rest may be floating on the perimeter, right. Many of them substitutable, but the ones that you choose to surround your life with, the ones that make your life richer,
correct,
and more integral to your life.
Your own. And I bet you if you looked at them, what happens underneath that is they've crafted a way to collect enough data about you, and they have a mindset and philosophy as a company, which is around the curation of the experience, right, that you look and say, I could not live without them being part of my life.
What a great way to end this interview. I could be here for another 2 hours talking to you. That was unbelievable.
Cool. Thanks. My pleasure.
That concludes our interview with Bryan Pearson. As we learned, most companies still view loyalty marketing through the prism of revenue growth. Their reward is the instant bump in sales they get the moment they make a bonus points offer. But where's the payoff for the program member beyond the savings they earn? Where's the human connection? That moment when customers make the leap from being indifferent about a brand to raving about it. People prefer companies that treat them as people. The true meaning of loyalty is when they believe the brand is loyal to them. You can find past episodes of this podcast on customerfirstthinking.ca, where you'll also find blogs, articles, strategic frameworks, video, and more on the transformation of marketing. In closing, a big shout out to Justin Eacock for his contribution in making this podcast happen. Until next time, thanks for listening.